The Bootleg Tapes, Chapter 5, Sirius, Valentine's Day, 1978, Monday the 13th of February. "Cheers for all the help," James said, getting up and stretching. They'd been bent over spell books for hours now, and if Potter didn't do some form of exercise at least twice a day, then the world as they knew it would come to an end, probably. "Well," Sirius replied, "wouldn't do to have Evans disappointed. And I know you couldn't have done it without me." "Such a modest and generous friend you are." "It's called good breeding, Potter. Look it up." James snorted with laughter, still stretching. He groaned. "Ugh. Quidditch pitch." "Yeah, go on. Need to be back by 5, though." "Mooney?" "Yep." Sirius pressed his lips together at this. Something inside him still winced when James mentioned Remus in that context. Obviously it was great that James knew, obviously, but it was also weird, and scary. The worst part was that he knew James felt awkward too, and that was why he kept bringing it up. The silly sod was trying to be a good friend. Are you two doing something for Valentine's Day?" James asked. He looked uncomfortable. Perhaps because it had only just occurred to him to ask, after Sirius had spent 3 hours helping him perfecting the floral fireworks charm for Lily. "Nah," Sirius shook his head. "He hates that sort of thing." "Does he?" "Yeah, remember the great snogging race? Remus, Lupin and romance do not go together." "Oh, I just assumed his snogging aversion was because he's, queer." Is that the right word?" Sirius shrugged, and they made their way to the Quidditch pitch in comfortable silence. The truth was that Sirius had no idea whether or not it was the right word, but it was the one Mooney used, so he supposed it was okay. Sirius had already decided not to think too hard about specific words, or definitions, because he didn't like the way it felt. Probably for the same reason he shut down whenever James tried to talk to him about his relationship with Remus. Sirius clearly remembered telling James every gory detail about his various dalliances with girls. What went where, for how long, how hard, how fast, how good, how big, how small. Not with Mooney. In fact, as far as James knew, they barely even snogged. Sirius felt a flutter of heat in his belly then, thinking about snogging Remus. Anyway, what exactly would they do on Valentine's Day? It's not like they could do a big public display, as James was prone to. And cards? Poetry? No way. Remus would either laugh in his face or die of embarrassment. Secretly, Sirius thought Remus was too cool for Valentine's Day stuff. Remus wasn't flowers and ballads. He was stolen cigarettes and torn-up jeans. He was punk. Though, to be fair, he did like chocolate. "Wakey, wakey, Black!" James rapped him on the back of his head with his broom handle. "Oi!" Sirius rubbed his scalp, though it hadn't really hurt. He tied his hair back quickly and followed his friend out to the pitch. Later that evening, when the girls were in their room, the subject of Valentine's Day was broached, and Remus reacted exactly as Sirius expected him to. That was very pleasing. He was finally getting the hang of Mooney. Anyway, Remus was right in the middle of planning a giant prank, which was Sirius's absolute favourite side of him. He was so direct and authoritative, ordering everyone about, head held high, gaze intense. And then he started smoking, and that always got Sirius right there, because of his bloody perfect lips and his delicate fingers and his eyes. He couldn't wait for bed, and luckily the girls left quickly after that. Prongs and Evans made a big show, as usual, kissing and whispering and carrying on like they were being separated for eternity, not just for a few hours of sleep. Sirius caught Remus watching them, and for the millionth time wondered what Remus was thinking. By the time Sirius was ready for bed, Remus had come over all quiet and thoughtful, and Sirius couldn't tell whether he was just tired, concentrating on the prank, or if it was something else altogether. Whatever it was, Sirius only made it worse. He put his foot in it with the Lupercalia thing, and he didn't know why. Honestly, it was hard to keep up sometimes. One day Remus was perfectly amenable to discussing his wolfiness. Other days it was completely taboo, and he'd shut down at the slightest mention. They sort of worked it out between them. They were getting slightly better at that. picking at each other until they understood. Anyway, it turned out that Remus was actually worried about all the Valentine's Day nonsense. Not because he did want a song and a dance, but because he thought Sirius might. This was so incredibly sweet that Sirius couldn't stop smiling and had to start snogging Remus just so he didn't see Sirius's dopey grin. Tuesday the 14th of February, 1978. In truth, Sirius hadn't really thought about it that much. Public displays of affection, that is. At least, he hadn't thought about it beyond whatever Remus's needs and preferences were. It had been the same with Mary. She loved snogging in public, she loved getting caught and showing off. So Sirius had loved it too. Conversely, Remus had always liked hiding and keeping secrets. And Sirius was learning that that could be a lot of fun on its own. Maybe Sirius was just easygoing about affection. Or maybe he was too much of a people-pleaser. It did grate a tiny bit when Lily and James spent hours curled up into each other's laps in the common room, or walked hand in hand between lessons, beaming at each other, while other students had to dodge out of their way. Obviously, he and Moony were never going to be that couple, not in public, but it was pretty tiring having to remember to keep things platonic outside of the dorm room. After all, Sirius liked showing off. He'd like to show off Moony. He thought about it as he and James snuck down to the dining hall to prepare Lily's present early in the morning. He'd left Moony sleeping, sheets wound around his waist, one arm over his head tilted up. In the morning light his scars were like veins in marble, and Sirius wanted to bend down and trace them with his tongue. He didn't. He'd made a promise to James. "Think there's going to be enough room?" James asked, as they entered the empty great hall. "Don't want anyone getting hurt." "They're floral fireworks," Sirius yawned. "No one's getting hurt unless they're severely allergic." "Bugger! I hadn't even thought about allergies." "Merlin, don't tell me you're going to change your mind now, not after you dragged me out of bed at this ungodly hour." I'm not. Come on, let's just do it then." They began to busy themselves, planting the large bulb-shaped detonators they had painstakingly constructed, and setting the trigger charms so they'd go off at the right time. "What are you doing for the rest of the day?" Sirius asked, sitting on one of the tables swinging his legs as he watched James fuss over the final touches. "Or do you reckon the cat's enough?" "She's got most of the day free, and I've arranged for the prefect's bathroom to be mysteriously closed for repairs." James smirked, pleased with himself. "How romantic," Sirius drawled. "It is, actually," James replied. "What about you? Still steering clear of Moony?" "Huh? The fight last night." "That wasn't a fight." Sirius felt his cheeks heat up. He'd forgotten that Prongs had overheard that part. "We made up anyway. Just did a silencing spell, so you'd stop eavesdropping." "Oh, is that what it was for?" James raised a cocky eyebrow, tongue playing in the corner of his mouth. "Piss off." Sirius shoved him, hopping off the table. "Mr. Prefect's bathroom." "Godric Black, are you blushing? Are you actually blushing?" James laughed, shoving him back. "Wow. Moony must be something else." "I can't believe you." Sirius shook his head, beginning to walk out of the hall, willing his face to return to its usual colour. How embarrassing. "Oh, come now," James laughed, jogging lightly to catch him up. "You know, I'm actually relieved. You two act like butter wouldn't melt most of the time. I've never even seen you kiss." He said kiss and not snog, because James Potter was a romantic through and through. He probably called shagging love-making. Sirius made a note to remember that for later. "Do you think that's weird?" Sirius asked, slowing down. He could really do with some sensible advice, and Prongs would have to do it if Lily wasn't around. "That you haven't, seen us kissing, I mean." James shrugged. "I don't know. You do kiss, don't you?" "Well, obviously." Sirius tossed his hair. "Well then, I just assumed it was Moony being his awkward self." "Yeah, it is. But you know, We can't be as public as you and Evans. James was quiet for a long time, thinking. No, he said finally. That makes sense. Sorry, mate. It's not your fault. Sirius shrugged. You should feel comfortable around us, though, James said. We're your friends. Yeah, I know. I mean, comfortable within reason, James said hurriedly, the smirk returning to his features. I don't know if I'm quite ready to see my best mates doing, well, if you even, whatever it is you... Potter, are you blushing? The fireworks and the kitten were extremely well received, of course, but Sirius got a surprise of his own after breakfast. Remus Lupin actually suggested bunking off a lesson and getting stoned instead. Well, maybe the getting stoned part wasn't so out of character, but skiving definitely was. And a chocolate frog to boot. That had to be romance, Remus giving away the last of his sweets. Prongs is going to have such a go at me for smoking here, Sirius giggled halfway through the first spliff. Nah, Remus replied lazily, lying on his side and stroking Sirius's trousered leg. Just wave a wet towel around and it gets rid of the smell. It's what the lads did at St. Eddie's. Cool, Sirius breathed, in awe. Remus gave him a funny look, which told him he was being weird, but he didn't care. If thinking Moony was cool was weird, then Sirius was weird. He giggled again. Remus smiled, shaking his head and taking the spliff. Lightweight? Such disdain! Such cruelty! Sirius flopped back on the bed and loosened his tie. You love it. Remus exhaled smoke, so that it washed over Sirius's body like fog. Oi! Sirius looked down, frowning. Don't do that. My uniform's going to stink. Take it off, then. Remus raised an eyebrow. Sirius looked at him. Really? Remus raised the spliff to his lips again and sucked. Those lips, those fingers, those eyes. He nodded, exhaling. Unless you think you're going to lessons today. Sirius shook his head, speechless. Remus sat up on his knees and reached across Sirius with his long arms to snub out the spliff in the mug of old tea on the bedside table. Sirius closed his eyes, already wanting to feel Remus, the weight of him, the heat of him. It had never been like this with Mary or Emmeline. No one had ever made him feel like this, like he could be taken apart and put back together again, new and better than before. So what if Moony wasn't affectionate in public, as long as he was like this in private? Come on then, Remus was saying now, a harder edge to his voice. I haven't got all day. Sirius moved fast. Remus wasn't in any real hurry. It was just that Sirius never refused an order if it was given in the right way. He pulled off his tie, then unbuttoned his shirts fast. Trousers he left up to Moony, because that was Moony's favourite part, and Sirius liked watching his long fingers working the clasp of his belt. Remus was on top of him now, straddling his body and leaning forward, kissing him hard, moving his hips ever so gently back and forth, just enough to be infuriating. Moony, Sirius rasped against his lips. Please. That was enough. That was always enough. Remus growled and quickened his movements, pressing down harder, practically biting at Sirius's lips. Sirius moaned, ecstatic. There it was, that need, that furious power. He was not ashamed to admit that Remus's strength, his ability to completely disarm and overwhelm, was one of his most powerful attractions. Being wanted, needed, by Remus was intoxicating. He frantically tried to keep up with the new pace, grinding his own hips fervently. Remus pulled away suddenly. His lips were dark and his eyes were dark, and Sirius reached up for him, feverish with desire. Come back. Door, Remus mumbled, glancing sideways. Curtains. Prongs. He'll be gone all day. Sirius shook his head, unfastening the buttons on Remus's shirt, pulling him back down. I promise. He told me. It's fine. Bloody love Valentine's Day. Remus grinned, resuming the kiss. I bloody love you, Sirius thought, out of nowhere. End of chapter 5.